For generations, the people of Israel lived under the heavy burden of slavery in Egypt. Day after day, they worked under harsh commands, wondering if freedom would ever come. Then the impossible happened. The ruler of Egypt finally allowed them to live. Thousands of men and women, children began a long journey into the wilderness, following the man chosen to lead them, that was Moses. But their journey to freedom was only beginning. Behind them, the powerful armies of Egypt would soon rise in pursuit. Before them lay a vast sea and a wilderness filled with unknown challenges. Would they escape? Would they survive the dangers ahead? In this episode of Bible Scenes and Stories by Uncle SAGC, you will witness one of the most dramatic moments in the biblical history, the great escape from Egypt, the miracle at the sea, and the beginning of the journey that would shape a nation.
Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Bible Scenes and Stories by Uncle SAGC so you never miss the powerful stories of the Bible brought to life through visual storytelling. The night Egypt finally released the Israelites did not look like a moment of triumph at first. It looked like urgency. It looked like movement in the dark. Families gathered their belongings quickly. Parents lifted children into their arms. The sound of animals moving, footsteps on dusty ground, and quiet voices filled the air as the people prepared to leave the land that had held them for generations. At the front of this great movement stood Moses. The staff that had once guided sheep across wilderness hills now rested firmly in his hand as he guided an entire nation. What began as a quiet command spoken in the desert had now become the beginning of freedom for thousands of people. The Israelites began their journey away from Egypt. Behind them lay years of forced labor, harsh commands, and broken hope. Before them stretched an unknown path through the wilderness. The early hours of the journey were filled with both relief and uncertainty. Some people spoke quietly about what had just happened in Egypt. Others walked silently, still amazed that the moment had truly come. For generations their parents and grandparents had spoken about a promise that one day they would be delivered. Now they were walking in the first steps of that promise. As the people moved forward, something remarkable appeared above them. During the day, a towering cloud guided their direction. At night, a glowing light gave brightness along their path. It was a sign that the God who had led them out of Egypt was still guiding them step by step. The journey continued through the wilderness landscape. The people followed Moses through desert paths and open plains. Though the land was unfamiliar, they trusted the direction they were being led. But far behind them, something began to change in Egypt. In the royal palace, the ruler of Egypt began to reconsider what had happened. The departure of the Israelites meant the loss of a massive workforce that had served the nation for generations. Anger rose again in the heart of the king. Orders were given quickly. The royal chariots were prepared. Horses were brought forward. Soldiers assembled. What had begun as a release suddenly turned into pursuit. Egypt's army set out across the land, determined to bring the Israelites back. The sound of chariots and marching soldiers soon spread across the desert roads behind the departing people. Ahead of the Israelites lay a vast body of water. It stretched wide and deep before them. Mountains rose on one side, and the wilderness surrounded them. The path forward seemed blocked. Then word began spreading quickly through the camp. Egypt's army was approaching. Fear moved rapidly through the crowd. People climbed hills to look behind them. In the distance they could see the approaching dust rising into the sky, the sign of chariots moving fast across the desert. Panic began to spread. Voices rose across the camp as families gathered together in alarm. Many turned toward Moses with fear in their eyes. They had just left Egypt, yet now the army that once ruled over them was closing in. Some people spoke out in frustration and fear. They wondered why they had left Egypt only to face danger in the wilderness. The excitement of freedom quickly collided with the reality of uncertainty. Yet Moses stood calmly before them. The man who once fled Egypt in fear now spoke with steady confidence. He reminded the people that they were not alone in this moment. The God who had brought them this far would not abandon them now. As night approached, the situation grew even more intense. The Egyptian army continued to move closer. The people of Israel stood between the approaching soldiers and the vast waters ahead. Then something extraordinary happened. The cloud that had guided the Israelites moved from the front of the people to the space between them and the approaching army. On one side, it brought darkness to the Egyptian forces. On the other side, it gave light to the Israelites. The two groups remained separated through the night. In the quiet tension of that moment, Moses stood near the edge of the water. The wind began to rise across the surface. The air shifted. What seemed impossible only moments before was about to change. Holding the staff that had become a symbol of his calling, Moses stretched it out over the waters. Through the night, a powerful wind moved across the sea. The waters began to divide. What had once been an unbroken surface slowly opened into a path between towering walls of water. By morning, a dry path stretched across the sea. The people of Israel looked on with amazement. Before them stood a passage through what had seemed like an impossible barrier. Moses began to lead them forward. Families walked carefully across the newly revealed path. Children looked in wonder at the towering water on both sides. The ground beneath their feet was dry, even though the sea stood on either side like great walls. Thousands moved across the sea in that moment, step by step, family by family, tribe by tribe. Behind them, the Egyptian army finally began to move forward as well. Seeing the path through the sea, the soldiers and chariots followed into the same passage. But the moment that had been prepared for Israel's deliverance would not become a path of victory for those pursuing them. As the Israelites reached the far side of the sea, Moses once again stretched out his hand over the waters. The divided waters returned to their place. The sea closed again, ending the pursuit that had threatened them only hours before. When the morning light rose fully across the landscape, the people of Israel stood safely on the other side. Silence filled the air for a moment as the reality of what had happened settled into their hearts. They had left Egypt. They had crossed the sea. They had witnessed a deliverance that none of them would ever forget. Fear slowly gave way to awe. The God who had led them out of slavery had also protected them from the power that once ruled over them. What seemed like an impossible situation had become the very place where freedom was secured. Moses stood among the people, watching as they realized what had just taken place. The journey ahead would still include challenges and long days in the wilderness. But now they carried something powerful with them, the memory of what they had just seen. The God who had called Moses from a burning bush had proven once again that no obstacle, no army, and no barrier could stop the purpose he had begun. And so the people of Israel continued forward into the wilderness, not as slaves fleeing fear, but as a nation walking into a future shaped by deliverance. The morning sun slowly rose over the wilderness as the people of Israel stood on the far side of the sea. For a few quiet moments, many of them simply stared back at the waters they had just crossed. The wind had settled. The sea moved gently again as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet every person standing there knew they had just witnessed something beyond human power. At the front of the people stood Moses. His staff rested beside him as he looked across the great crowd of families, elders, and children. Only hours earlier they had been trapped between the waters and the army of Egypt. Fear had filled the camp. But now that fear was gone. A deep sense of awe moved through the people. Gradually voices began to rise among them. What began as quiet words soon grew into songs of victory and gratitude. The people recognized that their freedom had not come by their own strength, but by the power of the God who had brought them out of Egypt. Moses stepped forward and began to lead the people in a song of praise. It was not just a celebration of escape. It was a declaration of what they had seen and experienced. The song spoke of the power of God over kings and armies. Through the wilderness they began learning an important truth: the God who led them out of Egypt would also guide them every step of the way. He provided food in the desert. He brought water from the rock. And he continued to lead his people through the unknown. At the center of this incredible journey stood Moses, the shepherd who became the leader of a nation. Now the people camp at the base of a great mountain, unaware that the next chapter will bring them face to face with one of the most powerful moments in their history. And that story is coming next. If you enjoyed this journey through Scripture, subscribe to Bible Scenes and Stories by Uncle SAGC, where the powerful stories of the Bible are brought to life through cinematic storytelling. Join us in the next episode, because the journey is far from over.